All right, let's get into the games we care about most here, starting with the one that just wrapped up right before we went live here. Bills 28, Chiefs 21. On the Bills side of this, Chris, what is your takeaway here? Because to me, it was just the balance of this offense and how they were able to, honestly, with some of the limitations in the wide receiver room, this is what I think the team should look like from an ideal perspective if they're trying to beat some of the best teams in the NFL. What did you take away from watching this game on the Buffalo side of things?
So for Buffalo, we even talked about it earlier today that it was going to be, well, can we get anything out of the wide receivers for Josh Allen? Is Keon Coleman really going to take a step forward? And of course, a couple of targets here and there are first down in critical situations for the Bills. But really, it has, we've seen this throughout the season. It's really just been the tight ends. I mean, Dalton Kincaid showing up for just getting over the century mark, 101 yards and that touchdown. And of course, Dawson Knox mixing in as well. It's almost the lighter version of, well, I guess we'll talk about the Packers later, but seeing how often they're using some of their tight ends and running backs versus really focusing on the wide receivers. The hope would be, I know we've got a couple of days before the trade deadline, but if there's any other assistance that we can get Josh Allen, the thought might be that they try and look to acquire somebody that can either stretch the defense or help out Josh Allen in the receiving game, because seeing those stat lines from Keon Coleman and not really seeing a ton from Elijah Moore and really just a focus on the running backs and tight ends, that's my biggest takeaway out of this, because if you drafted or trying to see if you can get anything out of those wide receivers, it really is an uphill battle for any of fantasy managers that are looking to that type of production for those guys.
Yeah, it's just like this is what the room is, They just don't have a guy that can be the lead dog in the passing game. Khalil Shakir runs the most routes on this team with 21 on 30 Josh Allen dropbacks, so 70% route participation for Khalil Shakir. That leads the team. They're back to like the big rotation here. Even Keon Coleman, who has mostly been an every down player, he runs 19 routes in this game, draws 2 targets, catches both of them for 17 yards, 91% of his snaps on the outside. So like Curtis Samuel mixes in for 15 routes, Tyrell Shavers for 10. Elijah Moore had that 128-yard reception where I had to be like, don't say that he's the best perimeter separator on the team. Don't say it. Shut up. But that's the state of this wide receiver room. But to your point about Dalton Kincaid, I think he's been the best downfield receiver for this team all season long. Mm-hmm. It's just difficult, Chris, because from a fantasy perspective, he only runs around on 43% of the dropbacks. Like, that is just so much lower than we want from some of these set it and forget it tight ends. But is the fact that he's attached to Josh Allen, and he has clearly been their best downfield receiver. Like, Khalil Shakir is good at what he's doing, but once again, it's a sub 1 air yard per target game from him. So we know what he's doing from a usage perspective. So there is the fact that Kincaid is just so important to their downfield passing game, being attached to Josh Allen. Is that enough for you to overlook some of these playing time concerns when he's kind of on regression watch every single week?
And I think that's kind of where I'm at. It's almost like I made the wrong comparison earlier. I was thinking more about the Browns and how they try and use their tight ends and running backs versus really not getting anything from their receiver core. And if that's going to continue to be the case, then I'm with you. I would love to see Kincaid running 60, 70, 80% of the routes. But if he's going to be used sparingly, if they want to try and get more offensive linemen on the field in order to create some of those holes for James Cook, and that's when you see Kincaid afterwards, okay, fine, I understand the approach. And especially with the deficiencies that we see in their downfield passing game without having that talent there, I'm fine with continuing to trot out Dalton Kincaid on a week in, week out basis, just because we know that when he is out on the field from a targets per route run standpoint, that's really has been Kincaid's calling card. And so if they're really not going to try and shift their personnel packages to fit their more pass catching tight end, but they're still going to use him when he's out there, I'll take that just knowing what we can get from him.
46% targets per route run today, as you mentioned. That has been his calling card all season long. He only has 1 game below 25%. 2 games below 25%, week 1 and week 4. And even some of those games, one of those in week 1 was one of 3 games this year where he was over 50% of the snaps. And in today, he's only on the field for 27% of the snaps, which is just so crazy for a guy that absolutely balls out in fantasy and like he has been producing all season long. But this is with the way this offense not just rotates the wide receivers, but rotates the personnel grouping overall. I mean, they use a ton of 2 tight end. Jackson Hawes is a blocking tight end for them. It's kind of replaced those jumbo 6 offensive lineman looks. Reggie Gilliam, the fullback, gets in the mix as well. So We asked the YouTube chat whether the Bills should trade for a wide receiver before the deadline. Obviously, as expected, they run away with 86% to yes. I wonder how shy Brandon Beane might be about doing that after it went so poorly for Amari Cooper last year. I mean, they gave up a third-round pick for a really unproductive rental season from Cooper. I do wonder if they'll be hesitant towards that. And they just kind of lean into more of this balanced offense because James Cook runs the ball 27 times for over 100 yards once again. It feels like that's the identity of their passing game. Like, yes, it would help to obviously have a wide receiver to dunk on folks, Chris, but at the same time, if they don't land a difference-making wide receiver, I think this is the type of formula we should expect from the Bills offense the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be too surprised because even the wide receivers that have been rumored to be traded, so like your Rashid Shaheed, so let's say that he's the guy that they wind up trading for. Okay, fine. I can understand the need for a field-stretching wide receiver like Shaheed, but even then, I feel like if that were to happen, we would get over our skis in terms of, oh, Shaheed, they need that type of player, so now Josh Allen is going to turn into this 15-20% deep ball target rate type of passer. And while Allen clearly has the arm to do it, that's not the way this offense operates. It's more of this intermediate type of looks as we've seen to Kincaid, as we've seen to any of the running backs so far. So while even if they were to trade for a running back that allows them to press more defenses deep, I'm not necessarily going to say that even if they wind up getting a guy like that, it's going to translate into fantasy production or instant fantasy production for that wide receiver. So that's really where my concern is.
I agree with everything you just said there, especially from a chemistry standpoint. Like, that was the thing with Cooper and Allen last year. Obviously, Cooper dealt with a lot of injuries, but they were just really never on the same page. It's hard to just drop a guy into the middle of the season in an offense that Allen has a lot of timing with a lot of these other players and just like, hey, go to work and be a 10 target per game type player. Not to mention from an archetype standpoint, the guys that are most likely available, Rashid Shaheed, Jacoby Myers, those are kind of slot flanker types, and they have an abundance of those. If they were able to get like Jalen Waddle or a Chris Olave or an AJ Brown or something like that, that's a different conversation. I just don't think realistically those guys are actually available. But of course, we'll see what happens over the next few days. On the Chiefs side of things here, definitely a frustrating offensive performance for the Kansas City Chiefs. I was surprised with how the Bills were able to consistently get pressure with 4 in this one. I mean, Joey Bosa wrecked this game. What was kind of your reaction to watching this Chiefs offense here?
You can kind of see on the faces of some of the Chiefs offensive players, they looked rattled, and you kind of felt that watching some of their drives from a drive to drive basis. Patrick Mahomes getting knocked down a few times, took a few sacks. And it wasn't just him. I mean, you could see, Travis Kelce got rocked on that end zone shot towards the back end of the first half, where it seemed like, again, that the Bills from a physical perspective, they were I wouldn't want to try and use the term imposing their will, but at least making sure that all of their drives were going to be something that they were going to have to grind out in order to get down the field. But of course, Patrick Mahomes, he puts on his Superman cape every now and again, flicking the ball down on a freaking 4th and 17 to Rashee Rice and doing some of those things to continue drives going. Of course, that stuff was going to happen, but it just felt like there was a level of perfection from the Chiefs required for them to stay within this game that, of course, a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes can do, but still having that requirement for a game like this, it just felt like after the first few weeks, having them run up against a team like the Bills that was ready for them from a defensive standpoint just felt like a kind of a showstopper after the offensive performances and improvements we had seen over the Chiefs from the previous 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dig into kind of the coverage data from this one, which obviously that's going to take a minute and really go back and watch it on film, of course, to see what they did from a secondary perspective, because you just thought like this Bills defense plays a lot of zone. They did get Maxwell Harrison back, their first-round rookie corner, who obviously is a speed guy, so maybe that played a bit of a difference in terms of them mixing up the coverages. But usually this Bills defense is pretty zone-heavy, and you can attack them in that way, which the Chiefs had done at an enormously efficient rate so far. That was just not the case here. Like, yeah, Rashee Rice has that 29-yard reception, 80 yards on the day. Really, this was just not a productive passing game. 15 completions for Patrick Mahomes, a career low, as we just noted earlier. The Bills defense, I just got to tip my cap to them. I did not see this performance coming. I thought the Chiefs would get the better of them, but I think there are still, despite the national media rushing to like, Chiefs are back, I think they still have some flaws from a personnel standpoint and some of the design stuff that I think are keeping them off of kind of, at least for me, my first tier of teams in the NFL. So shout out to the Bills like performance in this one defensively. But I do think that the Chiefs have some personnel questions on offense. Backfield update in this one. If you thought like Brashard Smith was going to be anything more than kind of what he has been so far, that did not happen here. Kareem Hunt leads the way with 11 carries. Brashard Smith gets 3. Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets off the practice squad for 2 carries as well.
Yeah, and that's where I was somewhat disappointed in the fact that, Kareem Hunt, and going up against the Bills' rush defense, I thought he was going to get the start and ultimately the majority of the work, but not really seeing a lot from Brashard Smith, not necessarily as a runner, but even as a pass catcher, despite all of the pass game woes we were just talking about for Kansas City. Whereas, Rashee Rice gets stuff going, but saw a few things like working for Travis Kelce, and really not a ton out of any of the ancillary guys. Like, of course, Hollywood Brown gets the one like down the field. Mm-hmm. But if there wasn't, from a down to down perspective, more work or more opportunities for guys like either Smith or even Noah Gray, as we'd seen him getting worked in a couple of games beforehand, again, it just felt like there was a lot of frustration for Mahomes and the rest of the passing game, because the Bills really did at least do their homework and had enough working on the back end in order to keep the picture moving enough for Mahomes to hold the ball down and not really be able to get and connect with some of his receivers as we expected him to in this game.
All right, we've wasted enough time here, Chris. We got to get to the second game that we care the most about, and that unfortunately brings us back to your Bengals. Bears 47, Bengals 42. 89 combined points between these two teams. Obviously, we'll start on the Bears side of things. And, of course, we should acknowledge that the Bengals defense, as we kept giving you crap for on Fantasy Football Live, that's what for folks who don't watch that show, that's what Chris was referring to. We said, he's going to have a ton of ammunition to come back to us if the Bengals win this game, if the defense shows up in the group chat. The Bengals defense did not show up, and I think the only people more frustrated than Chris Allen about the Bengals defense is the Bengals offense. There was a lot of frustration from those guys on that side of the ball after the game ended. We can get to that when we talk about the Bengals, but just a couple caveats before we get into some of these individual player performances for Chicago. Obviously, yes, Bengals defense caveat. The other one is I think we have to acknowledge what a weird box score this is for the Chicago Bears. 4 players, count them, 4 players threw a pass for this team, despite the fact that it was competitive all the way through and the starting quarterback did not get injured. Obviously, Caleb Williams was one of them. Tyson Bagent, the backup quarterback, threw a pass. DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, those guys threw passes. The starting quarterback himself, Caleb Williams, caught 2 passes, one for a touchdown from DJ. Not record a catch at all in this game. So that was just a weird box score. We got to just acknowledge that before we talk about some of these individual player performances.
Yeah, Ben Johnson, he was in his trick play bag just on the first series. I think they had a Philly special and like 2 other trick plays as they just waltz right down the field for almost a 10 or 12 play drive that capped off like a 70-plus yard with a touchdown on their first drive. Then afterwards, we saw the double pass from Bagent to Williams and all of that. So, it was as creative as you would expect. Ben Johnson kind of playing with his food for a bit. But then, of course, the Bengals tried to make it a game, and then we all saw what wound up happening at the end of that. So, it was just kind of a wild performance or wild play calling series for Ben Johnson, but I kind of expected that just given the defense that he was going up against.
Yeah, exactly. It was the right matchup. I talked about this morning and earlier this week as well on this show, that this is the right defense for Ben Johnson's offense to really crush it. Not just the passes over the middle, but also just build it off a power run game, which that was the 2 breakout performances here that we got from some of these rookies. Colson Loveland on some of those shot plays over the middle, and Kyle Monangai as the lead back for this team. Let's talk about Monangai first. Breakout game for him. 85% of the running back touches with DeAndre Swift not available. 78% of the overall snaps, and 198 yards from scrimmage in this one. 123 of those yards came after contact for Kyle Monangai. The Bengals defense overall, according to NFL Pro, missed 15 tackles, allowing 133 yards after those missed tackles. So again, Bengals defense caveat, but super impressive performance from Kyle Monangai, who I think has been building towards this over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and we had seen as DeAndre Swift had been trying to manage that groin injury that ultimately left him out for this matchup against the Bengals. We had seen a little bit more of Monangai over the past 2 to 3 weeks and starting to see him and the level of explosiveness that he brought to that backfield. And so now, of course, if you get this essentially like rainbow strip type of matchup that you get for whenever anybody faces Cincinnati, this is what you get out of it. And it wasn't anything exotic that they were throwing at them. It was a 3rd and 5. I believe that they wound up just running off tackle from an guy that went for 9 yards. So it's just, that's what you get when you face a defense that allows this type of performance on a week in, week out basis. So if you get that volume, and actually, honestly, he probably should have had a little over, or he would have been just short of 200 rushing yards and a touchdown, because the touchdown run from Britton Brown, the backup, the only reason he was in the game at that point was because Monangai needed a breather from the previous 2 runs before that. So that's what you get when you face Cincinnati. You just get this level of performance from everybody.
Yeah, so we'll see what the split looks like for Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift when Swift is healthy. They've kind of been building towards a little bit of a poor man's Gibbs Montgomery type split anyways, or maybe the more apt example is actually DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams when Ben Johnson was originally with the Lions before they kind of upgraded those backfield players. But I do think Monangai brings a nice dimension and probably is a guy who I'm not going to say he's going to completely make DeAndre Swift irrelevant, but I think it could get closer to a little bit more of a committee than we've seen in some of these recent weeks. The other breakout rookie was Colson Loveland, who ran a route on 66% of the dropbacks. Cole Kmet did leave this game with an injury at one point. He was targeted on 24% of the routes and 9.5 yards after catch per reception. So this looked like a great matchup for Colson Loveland against your Bengals, and he absolutely delivered. How much sustainability do you see from the rookie tight end here?
Well, now seeing he gets, again, the wonderful matchup against Cincinnati, but also it's just the after the catch ability. And it wasn't just all from the 50-yard catch and run that he had in order to essentially seal the game against Cincinnati. But even before that, on a couple of catches that he had like across the middle of the field, and you see the yak ability that he brings to this passing offense, where if we're going to see a bit more of DJ Moore used in the short area of the field and Odunze deep, he could wind up being that intermediate type target that could really help out a guy like Caleb Williams. So I was at least a bit more encouraged from this performance. Not to say that should be the result week in and week out, but still it's what he can produce or how he can produce once he gets the ball in his hands. And hopefully this should be a bit more encouraging for Ben Johnson to try and integrate him more into this offense, assuming Kmet has to either miss a bit more time or maybe he just tries to, again, integrate him a bit more in this offense, give him a few more snaps moving forward versus trying to keep Kmet in this game.
Yeah, and just last note, of course, mentioned Rome Odunze did not catch a pass in this game. I know that's super tilting. I'm sure we're going to get a ton of panic meter stuff about him tomorrow, so I don't feel like I need to say too much about it because I'm sure we're going to discuss it tomorrow. But just a super tilting game, but you got to just kind of flush it and keep moving on. Like I always say, this happens with wide receivers. Stuff happens. It just is. I know it's super frustrating. I have Rome Odunze on teams, and it's very annoying, but not something I'm overly concerned about long term. Still think he's one of the most important players in this offense. Let's flip to the Bengals side of things here, the offense at least. Joe Flacco leads the NFL in passing yards at 1,254 and passing touchdowns with 11 the last 4 weeks, Chris Allen. So shout out to Scott Pianowski. This is the carnival team of the year once again. The defense is as hopeless as ever, and look, Joe Flacco's just doing the Joe Burrow impression. He's only thrown 2 picks these last 4 games as well. So, again, I know it stinks for you as a fan of the team, but everybody's getting home from a fantasy standpoint. Even Chase Brown gets blocked up in the ground game here, but he catches 8 balls for 75 yards and led the team with 14 targets.
Yeah, and that was my concern last week because when we were reviewing the Bengals and their comeback attempt from last week, it was Jamar Chase and everybody else. T. Higgins just had 2 targets in their Week 8 game, and then of course we didn't see a ton from anybody else. And now in this week, it is a bit more spread out. Higgins is back to his role as the wide receiver 2-ish. I mean, he had a couple of sick grabs. The one on the left sideline that he had, I mean, that just looked like the ball just, I don't know, he had magnets in his gloves or something along those lines. Yeah, it's this one that we're showing right here. It's just, I don't know how he catches some of those. It would have been a lot nicer if the result had been a win for Cincinnati. But this is, from a fantasy standpoint, these are the types of performances that you would expect to see. Joe Flacco or whomever is under center for Cincinnati throwing it to their good players, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and of course, seeing Chase Brown involved in the passing game a bit more was at least a confidence builder for me, because looking at him moving forward, it was, well, we saw Samaje Perine starting to edge into some of the touches. He leaves this game with an ankle injury, but even if Chase Brown picks up more of the carries, is he still going to get used in the receiving game? And the answer is yes. So the idea would be that, well, Flacco's still nursing the shoulder injury, so that's why his average depth of target might be a little bit lower and why he might be more apt to focus on the short and intermediate parts of the field. But still, if Brown is going to have this type of usage, he should be at least close to that RB1 that we had hoped to draft earlier in the later parts of the offseason.